So adoption is the new bottleneck, you'd say, in progressing on your transformational curve.
You need to focus disproportionate effort on what we call needle movers. Needle movers are things that can create and sustain competitive advantage versus needle bouncers.
Enthusiasm isn't knowledge.
Because if you just take a generic course about AI and you give it to 10,000 people within an organization, that's not going to do anyone any value.
The topics that you don't like or that you find hard to discuss don't go away by not discussing them.
Thank you for joining us for this joint session with BCG U and the INSEAD AI community on how to unlock the full value of AI by investing in your people. I am Robert Macheko, co-founder of the INSEAD AI community. I work with boards and leadership teams on strategy, AI, and governance. Earlier in my career, I held leadership roles at McKinsey, BCG, and Oliver Wyman. Ritu and Roy, currently an INSEAD MBA and co-president of the INSEAD TMT Club and VP of the INSEAD AGI Club, very busy person, will monitor the chat and bring your questions into the discussion. I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm thrilled to be joined today by two people on the front lines of AI capability building at BCG U, Reinhard Messenboeck, based in Germany, and Jessica Beidelman, who is based in New York. Reinhard, you are a managing director and senior partner at BCG and closely involved with BCG U and BCG's work on AI capability building. How do you describe what you focus on these days?
Thanks, Robert, and hello, everyone. Great to be here in such a group. What we observe is that we are, I think, as we would all describe it, in a revolutionary phase, and it's fantastic to live in this time, but it's also coming with a lot of challenges. And I think one of the biggest challenges nowadays to actually make ideas work. When I grew up, Robert, in my consultant days, which is like whatever, 20 plus years ago, you could impress a client with coming with a new idea. You could say, hey, here's the call center. Have you ever heard of it? And they would say, oh, tell me more. What's this call center? But nowadays, that doesn't work anymore. Nowadays, actually, the capability to come up with new ideas, but also to actually bring them on live, which has for a long time held us back, has progressed dramatically. And with the advances of artificial intelligence and analytics, I think we are now in an even more progressed phase. And I think we, in a point of time where having great ideas and bringing them to life in a company isn't actually what holds back progress. What holds back our progress nowadays is our ability to understand it and to integrate it in a sensible way into our ways of working, what we call adoption. So adoption is the new bottleneck, you'd say, in progressing on your transformational curve. And that's why we in BCGU have actually created this entity that is focused on solving and advancing this problem. So we work with companies on getting not just tools to fruition and into production and life, but to actually bring it to people and ensure it's used and it's used to its original idea and you get the value out of it that you had in mind. That's the scope of what BCGU does.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Jessica, you're an associate director at BCGU and co-author of the recent piece to unlock the full value of AI, invest in your people. What's your role in BCGU and what kinds of problems are you working on with clients right now?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And thank you all so much for having both of us. So I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. I have spent my entire career in education and corporate learning. And so in my role at BCGU, what I do is I help organizations close capability gaps that are essentially standing in the way of transformation for them. So I really focus on building skills, mindsets, and behaviors that are needed to upskill and unlock strategic priorities for different companies. So that can be digital transformation, that can be workforce evolution, or that can be a Gen AI integration. Obviously, as you can all imagine, AI is the major focus for organizations right now. So a lot of my work is really about helping clients think about shifting how work gets done. So whether that be rethinking roles, actually redesigning workflows, or just broadly reskilling at scale. So I'm spending all my time right now designing and deploying a lot of different learning journeys, whether it's specifically for AI or more broadly for transformation of work, just really helping my clients think through what do they need to do to act differently as an organization and as individuals to really unlock value across their company.
Excellent. I'm very excited to dig in a bit deeper. So just to summarize where we're starting from, BCGU is BCG's capability building learning unit. U, I thought it stood for university. It doesn't. It stands
It
for
does not.
Unlock. And so it's BCG Unlock. They work with leading companies, as we've heard, globally to embed AI into day-to-day work and scale through executive programs, role-based learning journeys, and hands-on enablement to get real transformation. I found it fascinating, so we asked them to join us. They go deep into the companies they work with. Now, a question to Reinhard. In your article, you write that most companies are experimenting with AI, but only a small share are generating value at scale. Across BCG's client work, what really separates that top group from anyone else? And I think you have a slide or two you could possibly share with us.
Exactly, Robert, and thanks for the question. And yes, I actually brought a couple of slides because I think this is a broad notion now that I think everyone is also picking up that there is an issue, and it's not so much with AI or the regulatory side of AI, but it is about how do you actually get the value that you originally anticipated out of these things. And so what we've done here is we ran a benchmarking exercise with actually by now more than 500 companies. And hey, if anyone wants to participate, you just scan the QR code at the right top of this slide, and it's free. You can also get some positioning of your own company. So what do we see? So we see actually that there's a lot of promise of benefits already baked into strategies and investor relations. What you see here is there's 20% of the revenue hinges on making AI initiatives successful. But if you ask the same companies, do you think you're actually going to achieve it? Two-thirds think we're not going to realize half or not even half of the promise. So it's significantly less. And when you dig deeper into some of the reasons, the biggest lever that people basically put forward is to say our people are simply not in the position to use this. So what we've done in that study, in that benchmark, is also to look one step deeper into the group of that we call the winners and those who are still trying to catch up. And there's a few patterns that correlate with success. There's a difference between correlation and causality, but they correlate. Basically, what we do see is a few facts that are very different between the average and what we call the value realization winners. It starts off with what you actually use AI in. Those who are still thinking about this in individual use cases are actually far behind those who are going for a holistic AI adoption. So meaning that they truly aim to have most people in their company trained up and using AI in the future. That's about the ambition. It's important to point out, not about the reality. Of course, if you're already doing it across all your company, you'll be advanced. But if you don't have the ambition to get there, you also see that those who don't have the ambition, they're actually lacking behind. So ambition helps. What we also do see is that the use of highly specific tools is actually helping a lot. And we can debate a bit like where that comes from, and I have my observations there, but that general Gen AI tools are more common in average firms where very specific, function-specific tools make a huge difference and drive forward the winners. Another thing that we see is that in the upskilling, actually, those who work with their employees, I think everyone tries this, but the more specific and granular you can do it, we see that this drives better outcomes. So those who have more granular personas is like a definition of a group of people. The more granular and more specific this gets, the more it is actually correlated with value realization. And last but not least, nothing apparently works without proper KPIs. We do see that those who just to give everyone more access to AI, manage it rather loosely, are actually lagging those who really drive this with hard financial KPIs to push the topic forward. You see a lot more AI initiatives being coupled to hard financial KPIs in those who are winners in our sample. There's quite a number more. If you want to find out where you stand there and what are the ideas that you might push. And yeah, here's another QR code, or you just drop us an email and you can participate in that study.
Excellent. The KPIs leads into my next question. A lot of what you said, Reinhard, resonates. I'm leading a workshop tomorrow with the Fortune 100 company, and they're world class in their moat areas where they're famous for. But for the rest of the company, they just brought in Copilot and people don't really know what to do with it. So they're working on their emails, but they're not really seeing the uplift that they would expect in a global company. So Jessica, we talked about KPIs, and you also used the phrase value pools quite a bit in the article. What do you mean by that? And how do you help clients decide where to focus first instead of spreading AI everywhere and hoping something sticks? How is using value pools key?
I think the challenge you're describing is something we see really commonly across different clients. Everyone's experimenting with AI. They're thinking about specific use cases, but they're not taking more of a holistic approach. So when we talk about value pools, all we really mean is we're talking about the areas of the business where we believe AI can make the biggest difference. And it's taking a measurable approach to doing that as well. So it's not just rolling out Copilot. It's not just identifying different areas where AI can be used, but it's actually using it to drive growth, save time, reduce cost, all things that are going to make a meaningful difference on the P&L. So the way we think about it is we don't want to just go to an organization and help them to spread AI thinly across their organization. And we want them to really focus on 2 or 3 domains where AI can really move the needle. A conversation that I'm having a lot with my clients is you need to focus disproportionate effort on what we call needle movers. Needle movers are things that can create and sustain competitive advantage versus needle bouncers. So a lot of times companies will get in this trap of focusing on discrete projects, focusing on discrete initiatives that they may bounce the needle. They may reduce cost a little bit. They may increase growth a little bit, but they're not actually doing that over time. So we try to help our clients really focus on annual planning more than discrete initiatives. So they're really over time sustaining that advantage.
Can you give maybe an example of a high potential value pool or needle mover, as you say, that a client chose and what changed once they focused there?
Yeah, sure. One of my clients where we had this conversation a lot and they really thought of this idea of needle movers, increasing willingness to pay while reducing your costs. That's how you think about moving the needles apart. We realized that their executive team were completely talking past each other. And we write about this case study in the article if you've had a chance to take a look at it. But essentially the executive team, the business leaders and the technology team, they were talking right past each other. The tech team was asking for all these large scale investments in technology, but they weren't able to kind of really distill what the value would be for the organization, for the business. And the business leaders, they just wanted the next shiny thing. They didn't necessarily want to think about what are the foundational investments we need to make in our organization, in our technology infrastructure in order to unlock AI, for example. Can't get after AI if you don't have a good data and digital platform. So they were really thinking about how can we give people a common language at the very top of the organization so they can drive things forward. We partnered with them. We got them together for 3 days for an executive upskilling summit to really go deep into, okay, how do we give you all Gen AI fluency so you can have conversations and not be talking past each other? And it was really about how do we help them frame solutions towards driving business impact rather than just investing in the next technology tool.
So speaking the same language, I'm getting on the same page.
Yeah.
Question to both of you, maybe Reinhard first. When leaders first come to you and say, hey, we want to do more with AI, Reinhard, what is the thing they most often underestimate?
I think there's 2 things that you observe. People confuse enthusiasm with capability. I think that's one thing that you often see. So there's a lot of hot talk, and then if you've joined up enough YouTube sessions and read enough articles, people think they are knowledgeable. So enthusiasm isn't knowledge. I think that's one thing. And the other one that I observe quite often, so I was also leading our global change management topic for half a decade. It's very similar to what you observe in other large change processes, is that what appears logical to a leader is by no means logical for those who you ask to change behaviors. And this kind of issue that it makes a lot of sense to me, therefore should make a lot of sense to everyone else. That's very abundant, and I'm guilty as charged, of course, as well. But I think it's That's the two observations I would say that if you are a leader, I would always try to challenge myself along those two dimensions. If I gone overboard on enthusiasm versus understanding, and is it also logical to do things for those who I'm asking to do things, or is it just logical for me? I think those two questions, when you work with leaders, they will actually show, I think, to a large degree whether you are truly ready to advance in that journey or whether you're more like you want but you haven't understood yet how.
Jessica, anything to add on underestimations by companies?
Maybe what I would just add on is to co-sign on. It's not specific to AI. It is any change that you're seeking to drive within your organization. It's just the foundational principles of change management. I think a lot of times leaders will say, I decreed that we are an AI first organization, and I decreed that people should be using AI. I have the perfect communication strategy. I have the perfect communications cascade. I've told the organization what to do. Why aren't they doing it? So I think what leaders underestimate is that repetition is critical. They have to walk the talk themselves as well. It can't just be, I decreed that this thing is happening. They have to really embed it in how they make decisions, how workflows are rewired, and how people are incentivized as well. So I think a lot of people just think I can have that communications cascade where I'm rolling out Copilot and I'm telling people that they must use this if they want to succeed in our organization without really thinking about how people are incentivized and what's really required to drive behavior change.
Giving people also enough time to implement things. If we walked into a company that's really getting this right 2 years from now, what would feel different compared to now or to a more traditional organization? What would we see leaders, teams actually doing differently with AI? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can have a go and then please, Jessica. Bill. So I think what I would hope to see also when I look at myself and our environment, I don't think we will in the future distinguish that much between AI and no AI. There's so much artificial intelligence that will be built into many things. So it will become very natural, at least I hope so. And it will, I think, in a company that is advanced enough, I think this will not be such a discussion. Will you use Excel, PowerPoint, or whatever? Nowadays, no one asks you these questions anymore. I think the AI tools will become second nature, and not having the discussion because you're using it, I think shows the maturity and the advancement. And I had the other day, basically someone, I had a very large insurance company. We had the discussion on what's going to come first. Will we have great ideas or will we see people starting to use simple tools first? And I think what will happen is people first need to learn how to do certain things. They are now able to do it, like Copilot was one of these things. But we need to, of course, help them. Otherwise, they will just create additional mess with new capabilities. And then the benefit that could be attached to it won't materialize. Once you know these things, the great stuff will come next. I don't think we will basically see the benefits in a really, truly good company by waiting for fantastic, great ideas and then going after them. It's usually you need to upskill a broad amount of people and not just upskill them, but also give them very clear guidance and support through systems and tools and KPIs and education and leadership training, coaching, God knows what, to actually make sure the stuff is used in the right way. And just to give you one example, when you look at Copilot implementation or anything, so if you now have a tool that writes an email in half the time, one option is to actually write twice as many emails as before, which will start to kill everyone because now they need to read twice as many. Or you actually use the tool in a way that you say, now I can write much more focused and targeted emails. So we actually use the tool in a different way. And so I think if you just use it to multiply the number of interactions, it will actually create havoc and inefficiency, and it will basically eat up all the benefits of AI in no time. Unguided deployment is, I think, a signal of absolute disaster. And so I think a very good company, and sorry for the long answer, is one that uses AI tools without knowing it And those tools they use, they will be very directed and managed in a way to actually be truly guided towards value creation.
Maybe just to build on that, I feel very fortunate because I get to have a window into a lot of different companies that are taking many different approaches to the time that we find ourselves in right now. I think some common threads that I see across them are, as Reinhard was saying, they're not just focused on adoption. They're not just focused on rolling out new tools. They're really thinking about how do I embed this into my operating model? So we're not just using AI tools, we're actually integrating them into the way that the work gets done. So we're not just 2xing the number of emails that we're writing. We're fundamentally rethinking the types of roles that we need across the organization, the types of skills that we need in order to succeed. And then I think a basic one, and again, not just focus on Gen AI, what I'm really seeing are people who are curious. So people are curious about these new tools. They're curious about what else can I learn? So we had a session with the CEO and the top 50 leaders of a leading financial services company. We had taken their top 250 leaders through a Competing in the Age of AI program, where we really took them through 8 weeks of an AI accelerator to teach them about this. Suddenly, agentic wasn't covered in that curriculum, and they were really curious. We want to get our hands on this. We want to actually build some agents ourselves. Most top leaders of companies don't need to build an agent in their day-to-day work, but these leaders really wanted to get their hands dirty and actually build out agentic systems so that they would understand how they can then lead their teams in the future to use this new technology. One of my key lessons that are really critical are for people and leaders especially to be curious about using these new tools.
Excellent. Okay. Reinhard, in town hall, I was on with BCG alums. You used a simple rule of thumb, roughly 10% algorithms, 20% tech, 70% people and capability building. Can you tell us more about this? What's about the 70% in practice? What does it look like?
So happy to, Robert. I think the 70%, I think it is what we would describe as the ecosystem that actually makes the right behaviors logical for people. And what do we mean with this? When you have the right data and the right algorithms, you still need to use them in the right way. So there's a few things that need to be in place. And actually there's 7, I think, in total, but just to name a few. So number one, and I think it's so obvious, but still doesn't get done. If you don't explain very well how a tool should be used, it is most likely used in the wrong way. I just mentioned Copilot. Number two, you need to have a system in place that incentivizes the right usage. So KPIs was there, but there's also communication, for example, about how do you reward people who do something. You can do that in all sorts of things. It's not just money, but who do you mention as a lighthouse? So it's all this, how do you have positive reinforcement? A third element is your leaders actually being able to understand these things themselves, but also to explain how new tools are integrated into workflows, into the reality of those who report to them, and how they replace current work. What we often observe is that people bring on new things, but they don't really stop the old ones. We need leaders to not only be able to help people understand how they do things, but also how does it replace what I'm currently doing? What can I give up so they see the positive things? And this leads to, and Jessica already alluded to this, role descriptions. Often also a distribution of power, governance, how is decision making around these things happening? So there's a whole universe of what we call the ecosystem or the context that drives this behavior. And that's the 70%. So it's making our desired behaviors explicit, logical, and enabling the people to actually do it. And that is required because a good idea doesn't materialize into value by itself. You need to actually help it along and jumpstart it and make it logical for people.
Excellent. Rito, after this next question of mine, we're going to take one from the audience. Thanks. I've seen some people put in some great questions already.
Definitely.
To Jessica, you talk about 4 groups of people in the organization. This is also in your article, I believe. The shapers, the leaders, transformers, and frontline contributors. Why did you choose this approach, and how does it change the way you design the learning compared to traditional training?
Yeah, exactly. So we take a persona-based approach to thinking about designing a learning journey, especially as it relates to how people need to use AI, because different roles in an organization are going to use AI differently. So for leaders, it's really about how are they actually shaping the overall organizational strategy as it relates to AI? How are they thinking about guardrails and responsible AI? For someone who's on the front line, they actually need hands-on practice and simulations to incorporate the AI tools that they have inside their organization into their actual workflows and the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So for us, the reason we think about having these four different archetypes, and it's not perfect, it looks different the way we apply that at each different client, but it allows us to do personalization at scale. Because if you just take a generic course about AI and you give it to 10,000 people within an organization, that's not going to do anyone any value because it's not actually hitting on the key elements of their role and how they need to leverage AI moving forward. So again, we take this personalization approach and we use these archetypes to design a learning journey that's really specific to the types of skills and behavior change that we want to see across different roles.
I guess just what's fascinating is that we didn't have these tools to do this personalization before.
Yeah.
Very cool. So Ritu, did we have a question from the audience to throw in here?
Yeah, we have a couple of them. I would like to take the first one from Ken. So he would like to hear more thoughts on scaling requiring horizontal strategies. So he's given an example, which is to make data AI ready and shareable among internal external stakeholders in the matters of tools for sharing or trust frameworks. But they're also curious to hear from both of you on how do you think horizontal strategies can be used for scaling AI?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in that one. I've been living that at one of my clients now, which is one of the largest CPG companies in the world. And that's exactly the approach that they've been taking to their Gen AI transformation, which is each of our business units could build each of their own unique solutions as it relates to Gen AI tools, but they've really been taking a kind of a more of a platform mindset, which is everything needs to be composite by design. So as they think about the underlying data and infrastructure, there needs to be something that can be leveraged across different business units and that different business units can plug into. Because again, they all need to be leveraging that kind of same data infrastructure to design with the end consumer in mind. So that's definitely the similar approach that I've been seeing at some of my clients.
Another thing that you talked about in the article, three-stage learning progression. So foundational, which I think there are a lot of people offering this in the market, but then you get to applied and embedded. Can you walk us through those stages with a real example so people can picture what it looks like inside an organization?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So as you mentioned, a lot of training really focuses on foundational, which is thinking about the specific skills and individual needs to do a new workflow, to think of a new process. The training really needs to move beyond foundational understanding of a specific skill or thing to actually allowing individuals to apply it in their actual day-to-day work so that they can eventually embed it naturally into their way of working. So a couple ways we want to do that. One is just really making training embedded in the flow of work. So a lot of times you'll see a training that sits off to the side. This is something I need to do in my kind of after hours time. It's not actually embedded into the work that an individual is doing. Another way that we've actually been doing this in some of the programs that we've run with our clients is being really intentional about the types of application and simulations that we're giving. We've recently been launching a Gen AI tutor that enables people to actually be coached and work with this Gen AI tutor to create something that is specific to their role and actually get to practice the skills that they're learning in the program.
Reinhard, you highlight the emotional side of AI, and there are a lot of emotions around AI. Concerns about jobs, trust in outputs, what about hallucinations, and lack of time to learn. When you do capability building at scale, how do you address those concerns in a structured way rather than hoping they solve themselves?
I think this is super relevant. I would build on just what we've learned from so many other transformations. I think the topics that you don't like or that you find hard to discuss don't go away by not discussing them. A big fear about this whole thing, especially when you look at some of the transactional activities where bots and AI-based tools are built to replace them. Of course, there's a lot of fear around what does it mean for my job. And I think the important thing is not to negate that and ignore it and not talk about it, because it will be talked about. The only question is, will you be part of the conversation or not? By actually addressing this, I think that you can be a part of the conversation. The truth is that people, I think in my experience, people hate nothing more than being sold for dummies. So if this is a topic, it needs to be addressed. Since you can't give a clear answer usually and say, for you, Jeff or Mary, it means the following. You need to build trust in the process that will unfold once it becomes clearer. And I think that's what you can do as a leader. You can make it very clear how we will deal with the outcomes, in a fair and transparent process. That doesn't mean people will like the outcomes, but it means I'm sticking to my principles. I share them with you, and you can hold me to account that I stick to my principles. The fear that you can't give people definitive answer holding you back, and the reflex being, therefore I say nothing, is very damaging in the long term. And I would always encourage people to have the conversation. The sooner the better, because it will happen, and it happens without you in the room if you don't have it.
What about middle managers? How do you make them feel like they're owners of the change?
Happy to continue. And then, Jesse, you need to help the leaders to step into these conversations in the right way and to also be able to lead. In many situations, what we find is that the middle managers that we all like to bash because they are slow and don't do much for us, but they basically give a lot of stability in organizations in normal times. Their employees turn to them and ask them stuff, and they organize it all the time. They basically give structure. Now, in times of uncertainty, their ways of acting don't work. They are used to giving an answer to something where they actually now feel, I can't answer this. So it is basically helping them to work through this period of discomfort that doesn't feel normal to them, and understanding that their role here is to not give clear answers, but to actually manage people and help them through a period of uncertainty. And that requires an investment into these middle managers. And at the same time, Robert, I think it's fair to say that if a company does with fewer people in a transaction center, then there will also be less middle managers in the transaction center. So it also needs to be clear to them. I think we need to acknowledge that their recipe for success that they would usually deploy with their employees doesn't work in periods of high uncertainty, and therefore need to empower, enable, and support them.
Yeah, Jessica, or
While the age we're currently in requires new tactics, I think the fundamental principles of leadership remain unchanged. So the way that we think about empowering middle managers to lead the front lines doesn't change. I think we need to make sure that we're leading with empathy, we have transparency, and we're providing the right messaging to middle managers to then cascade throughout their organizations. Again, Gen AI is a new tool. It is fundamentally different than any other tool that's been introduced before, but it is just kind of an evolution, I would say. So I think it's really important that we double down on some of those fundamental principles of what it means to be a leader, to lead with empathy and transparency, and just think about this as a new wave of uncertainty and change that's happening within organizations, but those fundamental principles remain unchanged.
And on boards and CEOs, this question to both of you, maybe Jessica first. You both work very closely with senior leadership. If you were sitting on a board and wanted to understand whether management is serious about AI capability building or is just talking the talk, what are the 2 or 3 questions you would ask in the boardroom? And from your experience, when do boards and CEOs accelerate AI capability building, and when do they unintentionally slow it down? What behaviors at the top have you seen make the biggest difference?
My first and most fundamental question would be, when was the last time you used any of your enterprise AI tools, and what did you use it for? I think we've talked about this a few times, but leaders have to model the change. So how are they actually incorporating it into their own workflow? Do they have basic use cases, or are they really thinking about how can this fundamentally drive a step change in the work that I need to do? That's one question I would ask them. The second is, I want them to articulate, how does this change your business? What are the key business problems that you can get after now that you have this tool that you couldn't get after before? What are the key consumer or customer problems that we can now solve because we have these tools? And if they can articulate that, then they have a clear strategy going forward.
Let's look at some case studies. I'm not sure who best on the retail bank, but in the article, you mentioned a European retail bank that redesigned lending and introduced an ops AI agent to automate checks and reduce cycle times. Can you tell that story in a bit more detail and highlight what the team learned about capability building?
Yeah, Robert, that was actually me, not me, but me and my team. I think you described it well. So basically, this bank, what they truly wanted to do was to accelerate their time to yes. Most of us will have dealt with any sort of bank process where you throw in an application on one end and you want to get an answer on the other side, be it for a credit card, a mortgage, or whatever. So their ask was like, how can we do that in a much better way? And the German it was basically a German bank. The environment is that you still need a lot of paperwork. We produce a lot of paper, and maybe other countries are more advanced, but until we have educated the German government that you could do without paper, we'll all be in the grave, I fear. So what the bank basically then, together with BCGX, which is an entity that does all actually the building of this code, what they did was they built this code to digitize using Gen AI tools to find information on highly unstructured documents. Wonderful, we had the technical solution. I think the big challenge in the end was, Robert, to find a way to get people to use this. So I just give you an example. In Germany, we have a land register. Whoever has seen this would agree that it is a document that shouldn't exist. Just by the mere look of it, it could be done a lot easier, but it isn't. And so transferring data from there into a system is a painful and difficult job, and people made errors. So does the machine. Of course, the machine is not here to actually be perfect, otherwise, it would be incredibly expensive. The machine is here to be better or at least as good as the human being. And this it actually did. But as it is basically in competition to a human being, everyone knew, and it was very transparent from the beginning, that jobs will be reduced and future growth will basically be done by using this tool. So there was a disincentive of accepting that this thing is doing its job. And so basically finding errors that the machine has done were amplified and not compared on a fair level to errors that a human being had done. Taking this into account, understanding that this will happen, and building it into your system, your KPIs of how you progress and how you make people understand that this is a normal, it's by design, and it's actually okay what this machine is doing. This was part of the change evolution that I think we, in this case, luckily foresaw and built for. But it's just giving you an idea of what the problems are that are non-technical. Because what people actually intended to do, or where they would have gone, was to say this thing is also not really working as I want it to work, i.e., perfect. Therefore, let's throw it in the corner and continue as we did before. So you need to find ways to actually overcome this, ideally by foreseeing them, and if not, then managing them. And so there's just many of these incidents that basically helped us to finally get to a solution. And just to round this off, I think one of the really interesting findings, and I have to say, in hindsight, everything is logical and a success. But one thing I certainly didn't see at the beginning was that the jobs that remained were fundamentally different from the jobs they started off with. Originally we thought 50% of the jobs would go and 50% would remain. But actually what happened is that numbers wise, that was the result. But those that remained, about one third were super simple and extra boring jobs of things that you didn't automate. So you just had to transfer A to B and once a month, and there was no business case to automate it. And two-thirds of the job remaining were all of a sudden super skilled exception handling jobs that didn't exist either before. So all of a sudden you had all new skill sets that you had to train people for. And that was something I had not anticipated. In hindsight, of course, that's how it has to be. I think that that gave us huge challenges because you had to upskill people, not in AI, but in handling their job in a very different way. And on the other hand, you actually had opportunities to find people who had to do that really boring job. So there's challenges that come from this that I think we didn't see in that magnitude in the past. Luckily, this client of ours was willing to work through all these challenges, and they've, I think, reaped the benefit. And they are one of the first banks who have actually brought this system not into a POC or like a trial mode. It's in full operation and it works. Actually not aware of many others that have gone that deep into bringing it to life. But it came with a lot of side effects and consequences that you had to manage.
That sounds familiar. What you started off with was using the tech actually because it's not perfect. Waymo in San Francisco has a quite good record on average compared to humans. But if it has an accident, that's focused on so much that people want to stop the whole system going ahead. One more case study, and then we get to measurement. Consumer goods to Jessica. You describe a fast-moving consumer goods companies where you built an AI accelerator with different journeys for strategic leaders and the teams doing the implementation work. What worked that surprised you, and what might others learn from that?
This has been one of my favorite clients I've worked on in my career. And the reason is they constantly challenge and push me in a really great way. I started working with them about 18 months ago as part of BCGU, and they really actually were coming at us from a position of strength. So as you can imagine, fast-moving consumer goods is incredibly challenged by the introduction of AI and Gen AI tools. If you think about changing consumer preferences and needs and expectations as well. So this client was actually out ahead of the curve. They had already developed a number of internal enterprise tools that they had already rolled out across the organization. People were piloting them, they were experimenting with the AI tools, but they weren't actually seeing any impact. So we partnered with them, and this is part of a multi-year strategic partnership that we have with them to really upskill a lot of those middle managers we were talking about before. They are the crux of the organization. If you can get that middle layer to understand the behavior change and mindset shift of how they need to now lead as leaders in the age of AI, you're able to have outsized impact across the organization. One thing that surprised me was that you can actually have a compounding impact across the organization with just a small subset. This consumer goods company that has over 100,000 employees, our ambition is to upskill 10,000 of those 100,000 employees. And again, that is then going to actually impact a significant portion of the organization if you think about the teams and the functions that sit under those key leaders. So we've been constantly evolving the program. And again, what I love about this client is they're constantly challenging us to continue to evolve what we're doing. So as you described it, we've designed an 8-week AI accelerator that's both self-paced content that we have on an asynchronous platform, as well as live sessions that are led by leading faculty from Harvard Business School, London Business School, and others that we constantly evolve as not only the technology is changing, but what's happening inside the organization is changing. One way we've been able to do that is to actually highlight lessons and kind of transformation stories from within the company. And how we're able to do that is by actually leveraging Gen AI in our content development process itself. So our learning designers are really well trained on how do you use all of these different Gen AI tools to have a fast production model so we can hear about a story happening internally at the client and actually design a learning module and incorporate those lessons into the program itself. So it's constantly evolving and it's able to really drive impact in that way.
I'm going to move to measurement now. It's a question to both of you, but maybe Reinhard first. You make the point that adoption metrics, people use AI some percent alone, are not enough. When you design these programs, what do you look at to decide whether there's real capability building going on? What 2 or 3 metrics do you find most useful? Reinhard, and then maybe Jessica.
I think ultimately I would always go for the initial cause that led you to using or choosing an AI tool. I think AI in itself is not a reason to do something. Well, let's have more AI. I think in that example that I shared with you, the main driver was that they said competitive advantage comes from a better time to yes. That's the main driver. So that's what we need to measure. That is where the business benefit sits, and we can measure this. Now, using AI to get there is then a choice, and if it's the right choice, wonderful. But I think they gave us a hierarchy. So we always measured what's currently our time to yes, and then many things were actually implemented. Some of them tool related, some not. That also gives you, I think, an indication of how important it is to use that AI tool. In this case, what we then did is on the specific tool, we basically measured how many times do people still open the documents that they originally had to look at on their computer. How often do they still look at it? It's basically an open rate of an alternative to what the tool did. So we did it a bit the other way around. So we didn't look at how often to use the tool because you could use it. We looked at how often do you open up the alternative to the tool. That gave us a clear indication as to where are we with respect to adoption. I think my key advice there is that you do it for a reason, keep the reason in mind, and that's what requires the initial measurement and the KPI.
I think building off that, I've spent my career in education, and the ROI of learning is ever elusive, as anyone who works in the learning and development space can tell you. At BCGU, we very much think about leveraging the Kirkpatrick model, which builds towards measuring that business impact. That is incredibly hard to do. If any company out there claims that they are doing it perfectly, then they are not telling you the truth. It's really hard to do that. And I think the way that we think about it is if you're designing with a business strategy in mind and you're creating a custom program that is solving for that business challenge, your ROI and the way that you're able to measure that on the back end is clear. You've started with a business problem that you're trying to solve and you're driving towards that impact. What you're able to do then is to use the metrics that no one in the business will question, right? Productivity uplift, improvement in sales. Like those are things that people don't really question. If you think about sales enablement programs, it's very clear if I'm able to drive 20% productivity across my workforce, there's a clear through line to the revenue impact. So that's very much how we think about designing our programs. We don't want to just throw an ROI metric on at the end of a program. It's very much how do you actually start with a business problem? What are the business leaders facing? Designing a training program that can go after that specific business problem and then measuring that as you think about the kind of enablement of it all.
Excellent. Rita, we have some more questions, I think, in the chat.
Yes, we have so many questions. I would like to probably take one of the very interesting questions, which is a detour from our regular discussion that we're having here. So instead of talking about tools, the question from Alessandro is, in an era where AI tools can significantly elevate an individual's output, how can employers distinguish candidates with genuine capability from those who primarily might rely on AI to compensate for their skill gaps? Just curious to hear your thoughts on this.
But AI augments your skill gap. So if AI is a tool for them to improve their output and productivity, I don't know that I mind whether it's the AI tool or it's the individual. It's the individual using the AI tool to get me the output I need. This is well said by many people. AI is not going to replace you. Someone who knows how to use AI is going to replace you. So I think it's driving a step change for each individual that we each have to meet that bar.
There are three questions. I'm consolidating them into one, given the limitations of time. This is about Gen AI versus traditional ML models that we can run. So the question is twofold. One is understanding which is better. And second, is it better to build in-house solutions or is it better to get solutions from outside Gen AI or ML-based solutions? And how do you recommend it on a client-to-client basis?
The way I think about AI and Gen AI is it's not one versus the other. It's more, I like to think of it left brain, right brain. So AI and traditional ML is more from your left brain, right? It's thinking about data outputs, whereas Gen AI is process, prediction, automation. We think of that as the 3 Ps, whereas Gen AI is more about actually creating and augmenting new outputs. So think about it as being able to coach, being able to command. So there's different elements and there's different use cases for each, but it's not one versus the other. And actually, I find a lot of my clients gravitate towards Gen AI because OpenAI and ChatGPT has made that very exciting. But actually, most companies will get a lot of value out of traditional ML and being able to actually leverage the data sets that they have to do a lot of the process automation and prediction work as well.
This is regarding implementation and AI adoption, and I'm sure both of you have had extensive experience with your clients. The question is more related towards marketing and sales. So when you're rolling out agents for customer support, sales, and marketing, a question that often pops up is, to what extent does convergence between the agents happen or should happen? And how will this affect the training of future agents? This question is from Philip. Thank you so much for asking this question.
Maybe I can give this a go. I think where we see the biggest effect here is that for the first time, you can actually deploy a neutral instance that correlates success with what happens during that conversation. And thereby, I think the machine is supporting you. I think the ultimately, if you don't just replace a human being with a chat function, whether it talks or just writes, but if you augment a human being through that material, I think where you ultimately land is you have a clear desired outcome, which is a certain success rate, a certain volume, a certain talk time, whatever, if it's on the phone. That's also what I typically recommend. People can use the machine as someone who helps you and augments what you're doing. You are not forced to do it, but what you shouldn't do is fall behind what others are achieving and by not using it. That's what you shouldn't be basically found guilty of. That would then require some coaching and support. But no one should force you to actually step outside of, for example, your personalities and how you can actually do certain things if it is successful. On the contrary, it will allow the AI to learn from you on next iterations on how you do it and how you actually use it and what. So if that system is truly a learning system, it will actually benefit from people augmenting what they get from the machine through their own style, and that will then feed back into that machine. So it's not a one size fits all approach, like a conversational script that will automatically lead to sales, but it's very much a support of the human that has a logical feedback loop, and that I think doesn't then lead to a competitive situation or a one size fits all.
We're at time. I'm going to ask both of you to leave us with one thought, so maybe something practical. Jessica first, and then Reinhard.
I think for folks in the audience, go experiment, go figure out new ways you can use the tool and think about either personal or professional use cases you have and just get experimenting, get building.
What I would ask people to do is basically to do it themselves. What you ask of others, try to do yourself. And so you're not someone who's preaching to others without having ever used or been in their shoes. So you need to put yourself in their shoes, and that will allow you to be a lot more knowledgeable, but also to understand some of the issues that are coming up.
So thanks, Reinhard. Thanks, Jessica. For me, it's been very fascinating. This is real life stuff in a difficult area where real success is not obvious for so many people. Thank you, Ritu, so much for excellent work on helping on the chat. We have recorded this, and it will be going out if Reinhard and Jessica approve it. I hope they do. So thank you all very much. And yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, everyone.